Welcome back to Voice Advisor. Today we're going to focus in on visual supports. And as a reminder, this is a focus to facilitate the practice and generalization of a learned social skill. And today we're going to focus on visual supports, which is an effective practice and has a number of different components. And what we're going to do right now is define what a visual support is and then get into some of the details to implement it. So the word itself kind of defines it, and that is it's a picture, an illustration. It's going to help facilitate the understanding of what we're trying to practice and generalize into the real classroom when it comes to social skills. Now, what is the visual support in greater detail? It could be a post-it note, it could be a list of tasks, it could be a colored worksheet, it could be a variety of different resources that are visual in nature. Depending upon the need of the individual, depending upon the strengths of the individual, will define the visual support to be used. Now, why visual supports? Well, we have some individuals where language is definitely going to be a challenge. We know those individuals. So the use of verbal directions and or words in some sort of visual will become a problem. So instead, we need to use some sort of visual representation. And again, that visual representation can be quite varied depending upon the variability of the learner. Now, we do know the use of visual supports outside of facilitating social skill practice and generalization. We know it does increase the level of independence upon the part of the individual. We know it helps with language development as well. We know it helps with on-task behavior, and overall we know it helps with class participation. So there's a number of reasons why, and of course, what it's going to do. And as I mentioned before, there's also a number of examples of what a visual support is. So here's one that basically is a visual for weight. Of course, we'd have to introduce it. We'd have to use it in a certain way. But this would facilitate one use of a visual support. Here's another when it comes to first and then, which it has its own components. Of course, we're trying to visualize one step and then, of course, followed by another. We could also have something along the lines of a 5-point scale, or the incredible 5-point scale, I should say. This is another visual support to be used more that task list, that checklist for the individual. Again, depending upon the individual, their needs, their abilities, we'll use various visual supports. But from an implementation perspective, we'll follow basically 6 steps. These 6 steps will allow us to implement visual supports with a level of fidelity. So first of all, we're going to identify the situation. And identify the situation, we're going to identify where that problematic behavior, challenge, that skill, what we're trying to facilitate with a learner. Now, of course, if we're coming from the Voice app, we've identified the skill they've learned. Hopefully they have a knowledge and understanding. Now we're focusing that level of generalization. We're going to identify the situation as well. And this is going to be equally important, particularly when we look to generalize it. So I may have knowledge and skill, but the challenge might be the situation and what the situation provides, the barriers, the needs, and the list goes on. We're going to identify the information on the visual. And this is where, back to the variations of visuals, it could have everything from the visual, it could have some words, it could have lists, a number of different things. And then we're going to identify the type of visual material. And again, this would be balanced on real picture, cartoons. It might be the fact that if they have adequate reading skills, it could be some written words outlined, and a host of other things. Now here we also have everything from, is it going to be a real object, to written word, and everything in between. And again, that's based on what we know about the learner, and also the skill we're trying to facilitate with the learner for their efforts to practice and generalize into their classroom, hallway, school setting. Number 4, we're going to introduce the visual support. We're going to do it very explicitly, very direct. We're going to allow the individual to make sure that they understand what's expected of them. We're going to do it in a way that we can problem solve with the individual, a discrete way to be able to utilize it so they're not embarrassed and things of that nature, reduce any anxiety level in terms of the use of the visual support. We're also going to role play with the student, number 5. In this instance, we're going to ask the student, what does this card mean? And what are you supposed to do when this card is being used? And things of that nature. Be able to prepare the learner for what's expected and to be able to facilitate that through a role play situation. And finally, we're going to, as we implement, we're going to collect data, we're going to determine progress, we're going to refine if necessary, and we're simply going to facilitate the use of the visual. So that, in a nutshell, is an overview of a visual support, the 6 steps for an implementation of the visual support. And as we end this conversation, I want to reinforce with you that there's a number of different examples, a number of different visuals that can be used for visual support. Of course, more information on visual supports, including the guide, including resources that we have not created, but we've linked to to better facilitate your ability to practice and generalize using visual supports with students that have social skill deficits. Hopefully this has been helpful. Please check our website for additional resources on visual supports, as well as the other solutions we've created on Voice Advisor. Have a great day.